My father was a mean drunk. He used to joke with me about sharks in the bathtub. That's where this all started. The bastard must have thought it was funny at the time. Between me and you, I think it's fair to say that I disagreed vehemently with that particular assessment of that fucker, my father Lou. He would turn off the bathroom lights and hum the Jaws music, just to add a little dash to the mix, just to make the terror rise to the point of Cthulhu. Insanity and chaos in a swimming mass of darkness. Did I mention I was 5 at the time? Father of the Year, Lou was. The prick's mean streak was only outshadowed by his creativity. One of the fucker's gifts, I suppose. Lou was always able to come up with better ways to scare me when he had been drinking. Once, he actually opened a can of tuna fish and put it behind the toilet. I remember that particular bath in vivid detail. The whole place smelling like fish. My fear oily and dark as it rose to a fever pitch. At first, I would scream. I'd scream with all I could muster. That didn't help. My mother worked double shifts like Chinamen ate rice, as that prick Lou would say. So she wasn't there. And good old Lou? Well, I think he liked it when I screamed like that. I think he got off on it. So I learned to just keep it all inside, not to give him that satisfaction. But at first, well, yes, I screamed. Screamed like I was on fire. Hey, don't you be a fuck about this. Don't start feeling sorry for me. I'm fine. You just need to know this because this is important. This is how I first learned about them, Valentine and Mr. Conrad. I'm not going to make Lou out to be some kind of midwife to my terrors, but he goddamn well unlocked the door and showed them the way. The same as Sinclair. Well, not the same. Sinclair showed me what was in the light. Lou just gave birth to Valentine and Mr. Conrad. At this point in the story, you should know that all this fucked with me. This shark shit with Lou? I know that. I'm not unaware. I should have cracked Lou over his drunken fucking head with a hardwood stretched out like here on my lap. But I didn't. I was just a kid. It wasn't the time for action. The bomb was charging, but the fuse hadn't been lit yet. But that didn't stop me from thinking about it. If I'm being honest with you, sure as fuck I dream about going back in time, Marty McFly style, and walking up to my old man and just cracking open his goddamn skull. I smile when I see crimson in my mind. The look of surprise on my old man's face when the staff makes contact, I can even hear the crack of wood meeting bone. I have a good imagination. Casey Jones wouldn't miss this time. Takes the first pitch dead on and pops up a strong fly ball to right field. Going, gone. All right. I didn't hit my father, but the desire was certainly there. And I know what they say about the desire. 90% inspiration and 10% perspiration. Something like that. And I'm feeling inspired today. Inspired to cut those saggy tits off that curly-haired sneaky snatch snake. She will pay for her disrespect. This is about that. Telling you about the reckoning that is coming. You also should know this part. When I was 8, the shit started getting real. Those sharks were everywhere. Big razor-sharp teeth, gray oily skin, black beady eyes. They spoke to me in a raspy voice. A trench coat and dark sunglasses voice. Hey kid, come over here. Old-time gangster. Straight up, dirty glass, whiskey gravel voice. I heard these voices often. Fucking Greek chorus that followed me around. This was before Valentine and Mr. Conrad showed up. The early years, if you will. The sharks lived in the trees. That's where they usually stayed. They liked the tall oak trees with lots of thick green leaves. I don't know why the trees appealed to the sharks. Maybe the rustling of the leaves disguised their voices. Maybe it was the height. I can tell you this, though. They sure as shit loved dropping down from above. They would land with this meaty thud, this wet sound of their leathery skin hitting the concrete. I can still hear it when I close my eyes. I think they did it because it gave them the element of surprise. They brought that with them when they came ashore, dragged it out of the ocean with them from the depths, swarming dark masses swimming up from beneath to hunt their prey. When I was walking to school, I found a certain path to avoid the sharks. I mean, I was terrified, right? I was just a little shit, and I better figure out a way around this, or I was going to lose my goddamn mind, right? Those beady eyes and gravelly voices fucked with me something fierce. Snapping, biting teeth. Hey, kid. With a slap of their tail, they said, Come here. Fuck that. I ran fast down the path and avoided oak trees on the way to school. But the running wouldn't work. I knew running was careless. People could see me, peering out at me like minnowfish watching the predator after its prey. I learned to be careful about what people could see and what they should not see. Subterfuge. It wasn't an easy lesson, but it was one I took to heart. Oh, another thing. I had a little brother once upon a time. His name was Joe. It's important for you to know this because this sandbox was another place where the sharks would hide, those sneaky fuckers. Before all this shit started with Lou, I used to stage elaborate Lego battles between Harry Potter and his friends against Voldemort and the Death Eaters. It was one of the fond memories of my childhood. One of the few, a time when I was left alone. But then, those fuckers, they began to swim beneath the sand. When the sand was smooth, I knew the sharks were not there. So, I figured I could smooth the sand with the upside-down part of the broken rake my father kept in the garage. I could outsmart these fuckers. Long strokes, over and over. It generally took an hour to get the sand to an acceptable level of smoothness. First horizontal and then vertical. I would watch for the occasional disturbance from beneath. I knew the sharks were sneaky, intelligent, and hungry. Any slip in the routine could lead to a missing finger, or, if they got a good grip on me, I could have ended up right in the middle of a sandbox. It would have been a fucking feeding frenzy. It was the worst in the winter. The sharks didn't like the cold and moved indoors. Not that it ever got too cold, not in Baker, Louisiana. They had this particular affinity for kitchen cabinets. The sharks got thinner and longer in the winter, hungrier, like they'd stored up their fat and slowly worked through it over the cold months. Their raspy voices became whispers, more reptilian, thinner, but just as angry. And their teeth? Well, those bright white, serrated fuckers looked just as sharp. This is when I got my stick. It was wooden dowel crafted from something sturdy, like oak or walnut. I first saw it in the corner at my Cub Scout den meeting. Not that my parents had anything to do with me attending the Cub Scouts. It was an after-school program I signed up for myself to spend less time at home with my parents and brother. At the meeting, they hoisted the felt flags on these poles, and the scouts recited the Pledge of Allegiance and the Cub Scout motto. Bullshit patriotic indoctrination. But I wasn't thinking about that at the time. I was thinking about the dowel. It was the perfect size, 2 inches thick and 4 feet long. I snuck it out of the meeting one week and into my mother's car during snack time. This time was particularly well suited for distraction. As the other scouts were focused on the orange-flavored drink and sugar cookies the den mother cautiously distributed in a manner that would have made the staunchest Marxist proud. Mom was chatting it up with the other parents outside the school and smoking unfiltered Camels, like some kind of fucking truck driver from Alabama. The stick fit perfectly under the passenger seat. There was something about the shape that intrigued me. I first thought of taking a broomstick handle, but really, my parents would have noticed that. Probably not my mom. That bitch wasn't around. But Lou? Oh, you better believe Lou would have tuned into that channel, watched it all night long. And then I would also have to explain the teeth marks. Unacceptable. My battle with the sharks was to be a private matter. Any attempt to bring my concerns to the outside world would have been met with increasingly vicious attacks from the sharks. So, it was just between us. I kept the stick under my bed until I needed something from the kitchen cabinets. Mom worked as a nurse in Baton Rouge. I'd guess she wanted time away from Lou and his drinking as much as I did. Although, this meant I had to forage for my own breakfast. I woke up early before anyone else and used the stick to push open the high cabinet next to the refrigerator. The sharks usually got 1 or 2 chomps on the stick before I was able to knock the box of honeycombs free. Hey, kid. Cut it out, kid. Their voices were gravelly and drawn out. "Give me the stick, kid!" The box, more often than not, fell and spilled its contents across the kitchen counter. I gathered the spilled honeycombs while the sharks watched me with their oily skin and hungry eyes. I could still hear them. "Come here, kid. We won't hurt ya." Sure, right. Never trust a shark. I took a few pieces of sandpaper from school and polished the stick clean in my room at night. I used some leftover stain from a project Joe had at school to give the stick a dark sheen. I liked the routine and consistency of the process. It also smoothed out the bite marks. That kind of repetitive action calmed me, like with my journal, but I'll get to that later. It was a particularly unlucky Thursday morning when my father found the stick under my bed. It ended up, as with many assorted objects, in the back of Lou's pickup truck. "I took that pole of yours. Needed to get the mud clear from under the wheel wells." He told me this absent-mindedly, like it didn't even matter at all. I remember trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "But that's mine. I found it." "You don't need that damn stick. Leave it alone, you hear?" he answered. I didn't have a choice. I'd have my time with the stick again, but for now, I left it alone. I was able to avoid the cabinets for a week or so before the sharks got angry. They wouldn't let me just walk away. That's not how the battle was fought. At night, I heard them as they slithered about the house. I could hear them propel their leathery skin across the hardwood floors. They made a wet pulling sound, like damp newspaper dragged across a sidewalk. "Hey, kid," came the voice from the hall. I turned on the TV in the morning to drown them out. Get it? Drown them. But Mom wanted to know who had gotten up and turned it on. I blamed Joe. I told Mom that I saw Joe sleepwalking. Joe didn't see the sharks, so I figured this was a fair exchange for him. Why should he get a free pass? Ridiculous. If Joe couldn't see the sharks, at the very least he should be dragged off to the neurologist to talk about his nocturnal appliance usage. That's how I saw it. Meanwhile, the sharks found a new place to roam. They began splashing and circling about in the toilet. And listen, don't be a fuck about this. I know you're going to judge me, but I'd like to see you do better. I started pissing the bed in the middle of the night. I tried to hold it in and just use the bathroom at school, but sometimes I just couldn't. I'd like to see what you would have done, those sharp teeth waiting. Sometimes I would keep a bottle in there and then empty it. But having Lou find a bottle of piss in my room would have ended up with a beating. So, I tried to hold it. It didn't always work. And then, there were the weekends. No school, no safe bathroom. Did you think of that? I didn't think so. It was a losing battle, falling asleep dreaming of rushing rivers and booming waterfalls. But I would be goddamned if I would use that toilet. They talked to me in there. "Come use the John, kid. I'll bite it off. A little snack to tide me over till something more substantial comes along." And let me tell you, a 12-year-old who wets his bed is not received well by a distant workaholic mother who hates doing the laundry. It's received even worse by an abusive, mean drunk of a father always on a hair trigger. Mom was less and less pleased with my wedding problems and Joe's nighttime wandering. Lou started hitting me so hard, he left bruises on my arms and my lower back. It didn't take much to set him off. Maybe you know the type. I did. One night, Lou woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of hammering in the kitchen. He turned on the lights and found me pounding nails into the kitchen cabinets with the hammer. And, of course, the sharks were all quiet when Lou flipped on the kitchen light. Of course, sneaky fuckers. "What the goddamn hell?" was all I heard before Lou knocked me to the ground and gave me a fierce beating. "You'll remember this, you little piece of shit." The next morning, my mother dragged me to the first meeting with the school counselor. I remembered the way my mother looked at me as she sat next to me, all worry and concern. The bitch should be worried. She sold me out. She told them all about my bedwetting, late-night television watching, combing the sandbox for hours with a rake, talking to myself, and stealing a flagpole from the Cub Scouts. She used fancy nurse words like autism and obsessive-compulsive disorder. I could only imagine what she would have said if she knew about the sharks. But for me, it didn't matter. By then, the sharks had gone underground, hiding somewhere else, plotting and planning, preparing their two emissaries. Which, in some ways, was worse. I knew what paranoid was, how it was defined. I had the internet. But I also knew that people couldn't be trusted. I saw how they washed their hands, the piss-poor way they cleaned up after themselves. I knew how lazy and stupid they were, how they did everything with their very least amount of effort. I knew they weren't on my level from a young age. They certainly should not be trusted in any significant way. I learned at the university not to talk about the sharks. I kept these thoughts to myself. During my freshman year, I had been forced to meet with a psychologist after I had an outburst in class. That's what they called it, an outburst. An unacceptable outburst interrupting the academic learning environment. I had seen Valentine for the first time, and I think my reaction was rather reasonable. Intense, lengthy screams. The psychologist I met with went to the gym too much. He reminded me of Vin Diesel, with his bald head and those disconcerting veins. Like they were ready at any moment to come crashing through his skin. I disliked him immediately. The way he shook my hand and then wiped his nose. The way the stack of books and papers on his desk was haphazardly piled without respect to size or color. And the staleness of the office. Like, you could smell the pathetic sadness of the last person he talked to hanging in the air. It was safe to say I didn't care for Dr. Robert Hawkins in the least. And while I didn't like him, I already told you fuckers that I'm not stupid. I'm smart enough to be aware of the power Vin Diesel held over me. The fear hung in the air like the smell of a skunk days after it had sprayed someone. I told Vin Diesel about the sharks. Cautiously at first. I was no fool. But I was worried. I just told him the basics. Hell, if I had it together, I wouldn't have shouted about the sharks in class to begin with. That's what caused this whole mess. So that small moment of weakness with Vin Diesel, the mentioning of the sharks and the trees around campus, was enough to cause the psychologist to watch me. Like something out of Orwell's 1984. Big Brother was watching me. I knew I had to be on good behavior. They called my father. He couldn't be bothered to come to campus. The embarrassment of them calling my father was something that stuck with me like a violation. Vin Diesel treated me like a child, and I was no child. No. They'll all see that. It's best not to underestimate me. I'm sure if my mother was there, a smelling of smoke and hospital disinfectant, she would have had something to say. Her petite self, brimming with that superficial southern charm. Yes, Dean? Oh my, I'm sure he didn't say such a thing. Just like middle school all over again. But she wasn't there. The cancer took her right before Valentine showed up. And listen, don't be a fuck about it. I'm fine. Better off without her and Lou. Parents of the fucking year. The takeaway from my time at counseling and psychological services was simple. I don't talk about sharks anymore with anyone. I told Vin Diesel I was not a danger to others or myself. I met with him 3 more times and was successful in convincing him that I was not going to cause any more problems. That was last year. I agreed to meet with a psychiatrist to consider medications. I was smart and dedicated enough to sit quietly and listen to the psychiatrist, a fat man who moved as slow as the hot New Orleans summer heat. The sweat pouring off his head was just as disgusting as the armpit stains under his ill-fitted Oxford shirt. He had a mess of a desk, with a prescription pad haphazardly lying next to a pile of charts and unanswered phone messages, and a partially used napkin on the desk next to his half-finished lunch. The smell of pad thai still lingered in the office. Why would I listen to a man who was clearly not only a disaster of a human being, but also in league with others plotting against me? Maybe that was part of their ruse, giving me a sloth of a psychiatrist to try to get me to let my guard down. It's one of my most strongly held pet peeves, my Achilles heel, if you will. You should know that about me. A lack of dedication and commitment, lazy and unfocused people. That's really the problem with our society. People lost, staring off into the TV and Facebook. No one lives life intentionally anymore. I do. When I see something, I go for it. Laser focused. I just hadn't found something yet to focus on. Not until Mr. Sinclair gave me some guidance, showed me the light. Anyway, back to the fat shit with his legal drug dealing practice. I just smiled and said all the right things. I listened as Dr. Russ Fitzgerald explained the benefits to a trial of Abilify to keep the thoughts of sharks and repetitive actions away. I listened to the side effects and looked thoughtfully at the glass award on the corner of the desk. It read, Dr. Russ Fitzgerald for Outstanding Professional Leadership, the New York Psychiatric Association. I thought about picking up that award. I could feel the weight of it in my hand. How I would swing it in a wide arc, smashing down onto that fat man's head. I thought about the sound of cracking. The blood would fly up and splatter all over the office. How that would be fitting. To slaughter Dr. Russ Fitzgerald and leave his office like the pigsty it was. How gratifying it would be to see the fat hog lying on the ground and grasping at speech. His eyes darting the way a head trauma's victim's eyes dart from side to side. I like thinking about how raw the eyes would look. Out of sync, out of focus. Then I would cram some of Dr. Russ Fitzgerald's scripts from that prescription pad down his fat gullet. Give the good doctor a taste of his own medicine. But I did none of that. Instead, I nodded. I said I would think about it and appeared genuinely grateful when the doctor offered me a starter pack of the medication for free. This pleased Dr. Russ Fitzgerald. I scheduled a follow-up appointment for the next month and agreed to start the trial of medication and call the nurse if the side effects were too troubling for me. I nodded and imagined I would not be troubled in the least by the side effects. I was pleased with myself that I was able to wait until leaving the counseling center to find a trash can for the small brown package of pills. I shoved it deep into the trash can outside the student union with disdain. That fucking guy. Like, I'm going to take that poison? 3 weeks later, I called and left a message to cancel my appointment with Dr. Fitzgerald, explaining I had a difficult test to study for and would reschedule after Thanksgiving break. The counseling center was busy, so they never followed up with me again. Easy. Predictable. And fine by me. More than fine, really. I was careful to have no more outbursts that interrupted the academic learning environment. Dr. Hawkins and Dr. Fitzgerald faded into the background. Now here I am, sitting at my desk with a waste paper basket filled with that sneaky snatch snake's word vomit. I have a different problem on my mind today, something that requires intentional action. I stand up and reach under my bed to take out the small safe I keep there. I unlock it and take out the leather-bound journal. This is where I write down my best ideas. Chapter 5, verse 3. The spider's web is created over time and in a result of practice. I'm not like those other idiots tipping their hands for all to see with their legacy tokens and writing about who they will kill on Facebook, making YouTube videos about their hit lists. I read about those. I've studied. I'm smart enough to know that anything I write down on the computer can be found easily. The sharks, the school, the government, all three working in cahoots. They could track me that way. I know that, and I'm aware. But my journal? Well, I learned from my run-in with Dr. Robert Hawkins to be smart about my research and planning, to be quiet, stealthy. I open the journal and take out my pen to begin a new page. I write down one word at the top and then underline it a few times. I write in all caps for emphasis. Initiation. I continue writing, flipping backwards and checking my notes. I'm slightly embarrassed to tell you this next part. It's personal, and I think you will judge me. But I've shared so much already, and I'm starting to feel like you might be able to understand. Maybe just a little. Here's the thing. As I'm flipping and checking my notes, I look down at my stiff erection poking pleasingly against my jeans. I grin. Apparently, I'm excited about what is to come. Don't be a fuck about it.